My name is Pardeep Kaleka. I am a survivor from the Sikh Temple shooting that happened on Oak Creek. It happened in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, August 5th, 2012, about 6 years ago. One of the people who did lose their life that day was my father, Temple President, Sitwan Singh Kaleka. Following that, we worked with Not in Our Town to create a film that documents not only what happened that day, but the response to it. And been honored and to be able to show that film to audiences all over the United States, as far as like kind of a program to what do we do when bad things happen to us. We have a choice to either become cynical about it or to actually take some action, and we've been humbled to be able to get our community known to the broader community after August 5th. And work with Not in Our Town.
The audiences for the project, have they been mostly Sikhs, or have they been across the boards, or have there been all kinds of people? Or
yeah, the audience that we typically get are neighborhoods, interfaith, a mixture of people that are just concerned about generally the changing demographic of their neighborhood. One of the biggest things that we saw that was facing sort of the tension in the air was changing neighborhood, changing demographics. A lot of neighborhoods struggling, going from largely Christian towns to allowing in people of different faiths. I mean, Muslims, Hindus, and how do they navigate that change? So most of our audience has been not Sikhs. It's actually been the broader public who is struggling with who are Sikhs.
Have the question of refugees and stuff come up a lot?
Yeah, all kinds.
Because right now we have the Syrian group that's coming over, and I know I talked to one of the social groups, Lutheran Social Services. And they were saying that there was kind of a struggle with them, placing them and etc.
So we have talked about the issue of refugees, immigrants, and that comes along with the film as far as what we're taking on. The film is about a white supremacist who kills 6 people because of what they represent to the American fabric, and we felt the need to respond to that and say, okay, this is who we are, and I think immigrants and refugees genuinely will take up that responsibility and show you who they are, and I don't know an immigrant or a refugee who is not value added to this country because of the appreciation that they feel for being given the opportunity to be in America.
Now, that the shooter at the temple, he was kind of a lone wolf, but he was tied into various hate groups or something like that?
No, the shooter at the temple was an affiliated white supremacist.
Oh, he was?
His name was Wade Michael Page. He was an ex-military, psych ops. He was discharged out of the military when he was caught drinking, and he joined the movement after he was just discharged out of the military, he was an affiliated white supremacist that belonged to one of the most violent white power gangs in the world.
Have you talked to any veterans groups as far as PTSD? Was this guy having problems with PTSD as far as you know?
As far as PTSD, to be diagnosed with PTSD, you have to go into a clinic, and so a lot of times the symptomology for PTSD is hypervigilance, dialectical thinking. That means black and white thinking, disassociation, a lot of the trauma-related symptoms. I think that the people, and he could be having those symptoms, but maybe he wasn't diagnosed. But I don't think that was his only thing. I don't think the military caused him to be, caused him to commit that act that day. I think it's a totality of a whole bunch of things that happened throughout his lifetime. And so whenever we have multi-symptom problems like that, I think we need multi-symptom solutions. But yeah, he was a vet. He was discharged. I think a lot of his want to kill 6 immigrants or kill a bunch of immigrants that day was that he had genuinely had an unhealthy sense of masculinity. And this is something that I think a lot of boys growing up in America struggle with, is this unhealthy sense of being able to emotionally express yourself. And the two things that boys and men do is they either avoid or they get angry. And you got a whole spectrum of emotions that happen, from sadness to guilt to all kinds of things that can happen with that. But I think less than PTSD, it's about men and boys not being able to express themselves in genuine ways.
Do you know where he served? Did he serve in Iraq or anything like that, or don't you know that much about him?
I'm not sure where he served.
Okay. How's the temple been handling this stuff over the years now?
Yeah, so the temple.
It's now been a number of years, so.
Yeah, it's been about 6 years now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're going on with life.
Yeah.
For us, for Sikhs, we call it Gurbani, we call it Shahidi, we call it sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knew about Sikhs before August 5th, 2012, and we're the 5th largest religion in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the thing, is like, we don't get to know people before something like this happens, but we understand that was the sacrifice of that day, and it really took us saying, you know what, we're not going to wait for people to come to us. We're just going to go out to people and let you know who we are. And we realize there's obviously there's segregation, but there's also self-segregation, meaning that like people keep to their own, whoever their own is. This country we have something called a possession narrative, meaning that like people say, this is my country, this is my religion, these are my people, this is my faith, and a lot of times all of that is just illusions. And that's what Sikhism was built upon, saying, you know what, we have to separate people from their illusions and bring them together and say, we are all one. And we took that as a sign that day to say, okay, you know what, you're going to come here and you're going to try to divide and conquer and separate and make people hate. But we're going to bring people together with the ultimate truth that we are all one.
I wanted to get back to your bit about having trouble with masculinity between men and boys and stuff like that, at least in this country anyway.
Yeah.
Sikhism is heavily based on the idea of peace.
Mm-hmm.
You guys grow up with all that.
Yeah.
How is it dealing with a country that has a rationale of gun ownership?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? Maybe not yourselves personally, but how do you deal with the rest of the culture like that?
Yeah,
because that seems to be based around how you express yourself, masculine-wise.
For Sikhs were founded on the basis of peace, but as the years went, there was times that we would take up arms, and that was because of, at that time, Hindu persecution, Muslim persecution, Afghan persecution, British persecution, and that persecution being like conflict that Sikhs felt like they needed to take up arms. But it is written in the book that when you take up arms, if you pull out a knife out of your sleeve, you better put that back in with blood, because that should have been your last resort. And so taking up arms should not be a proactive thing to govern the world and to police the world, because you are trying to maintain the resources that you have. And it is very tough to come to a country that sometimes, like, children know how to shoot, like, they know the sound of gunfire at 2 or 3 and understand how, like, a clip works and a gun works. It's just our fascination in this country with guns is incredibly morbid, and with that violence, with that this sense of like what a man is and what a man should represent, and it's advertised without us even knowing it, that it's like, here I am watching TV and I see this person, and And if I'm a boy and I don't feel like I'm strong enough, powerful enough, and now I'm starting to compensate because I don't feel those things. Now I'm overly trying to be a man in a boy's body when I haven't even been taught the emotional skills on how to be a man. And so I think our culture of gun worship is just incredibly morbid, but incredibly perverted as well.
And you all have families, you all have kids. All those kids are exposed to video games and, and movies and things like that, and toys and stuff. The difference between fantasy and reality, most people seem to think everybody knows the difference, except someone who has some real emotional issues or mental problems. How do you kind of see that playing out? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, now I see it as, I'm a grown up and I see it as a man, and I do have 4 kids. I have 3 boys. They definitely see things on TV, but as parents, we can monitor what they see. My kids, for example, my kids do not stay on the iPad too long. They don't have video games. They want video games. They want the next latest and greatest shoot 'em up game. But that's what we can control and say, you know what, I'm not going to buy that for you. I know I have friends that I've grown up with, and as a therapist now, I can kind of see from a different lens on how people are doing things and how people are raising, especially boys, how we're raising boys and without that level of emotional intelligence. And I'll give you an example. I have a good friend that I grew up with, and we were having dinner, and he tells me that his boy is not doing so good in school and feels like he's not strong enough.
Oh, I get the feel. I'll take over. All right.
No worries. So I have a friend that I grew up with, and he has a son. Son's getting a little bit older, and telling his dad, like, you know what, I don't feel strong enough. I don't feel big enough, tall enough, and all these things. And whenever I hear that, something kind of goes off in my psyche of like, okay, you know what, that's shame speaking. Like that's his shame speaking. And instead of addressing that or talking about that and seeing what that's about, and maybe he did talk about it, but in his next breath, he tells me about how he loves to play first-person shooter games, and go to movies where you essentially have the white male hero, and he's off in military battle, and he's going against the brown bad guy. And he's looking at me, and he understands my history. He's my friend, and he's like, "Oh, was there anything wrong with that?" I said, "Well, for one, like a kid's psyche works in this mechanism, and now you're taking him to movies, and he is compensating for that sense of a lack of power, or that shame mechanism. He's shame mechanism coping by feeling stronger than he probably should at that moment. He should just wrestle with, I don't feel strong enough at that time, and I just need to be loved, rather than I need to feel powerful."
The difference between being a dad and husband and family man and all that kind of stuff, and being a therapist. What sort of problems do you see out there among other folks in comparison to your own family or whatever, and how do you deal with things like that?
Great question. In a broad sense, the biggest problem that I see are people are separated. People are lonely. There was a study that just came out the other day, pretty comprehensive study, 20,000 people, and a significant population, more than half, reported that they feel lonely. And there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. Because being alone is like, I just want seclusion and solitude, so I'm going to be alone. It's a choice. Feeling lonely, and most of these people who were feeling lonely had a partner or had friends. And so what that tells me is that even in the midst of communication and the way that the world is, we still feel lonely. A lot of people feel lonely. And the other problem is that we feel separated. We feel disconnected. Somebody tells me something like, Pardeep, I'm sick. I am sick of feeling like myself. I will tell them, in that same sentence, you talked about the I and the self, right? You talked about two people in the same sentence, and saying, and I'm applauding that they got to the point that where they said, I'm sick of feeling like myself, because then maybe we can bring the I and the self back together, back whole. People think that they're separated from other people, and this is exactly what Wade Page, the shooter, thought too. He thought that he was separated from other people. He thought that he was different from other people, and a lot of times this is what we think. We're like, those people are not like me. The truth is that we're separated from ourselves, and when we're separated from self and the I, we're not one, so we can't be one with the next person. We can't be whole. We can't even connect. But we're trying to, but it's just like it's sometimes we connect through our minds and say, okay, you know what, I can speak logic and I can make sense of this, but then you're not connecting with your heart. And some people are connecting with their heart and their feelings, but not connecting with their mind. And people are just those two things. Like, people are separated, and a lot of people are genuinely lonely.
There's a lot of talk now about cell phone mania, and people seem to be relating to each other on cell phones, but not in person.
Yeah.
There's no scientific evidence that I can support, offer this to you, and you're probably not qualified to answer that anyway, but I was just looking for an opinion. Do you find, or do you think that the cell phone thing is, rather than bringing us together, is kind of separating us more? Or is it just that we're just getting lost in tangents and going off on side roads?
No, I think cell phone technology is separating us in a way. It's bringing us together, but in a very artificial sense. And so a lot of times we're thinking about relationships not from the genuine place that we used to think about them before, but from an artificial sense. And that, for us, as spiritually, as human beings, that's not gratifying enough. It's gratifying in ways of like dealing with things and saying, okay, you know what, because I got 300 likes on this, I'm popular. But really knowing deep down inside, you're not really happy with that, because that's surface level stuff. You would be happier if you just went in a little bit deeper with that one like and with that one person, and have that meaningful relationship. I see people who have 3,000 Facebook friends, and they're some of the loneliest people in the world. And I see some people who are not even on social media, and they're some of the happiest people in the world. Now that basically tells you that we have overinvested in technology and artificial mechanism of happiness. Well, can I talk about my book?
Oh, I didn't know you had a book. Okay, go for it.
Yeah. So I got a book. It's called The Gift of Our Wounds, and I co-wrote it with a person who started the same organization that the shooter belonged to. So he was a founding member of this organization, and following the shooting, I reached out to him to kind of understand why somebody would do something like this, and to understand what we can do about it. And that relationship from that time has turned into a genuine brotherhood, and it's chronicled in our new book called The Gift of Our Wounds, which talks about his life growing up here in Mequon, Wisconsin, getting into what they call the white supremacist movement, and starting the same organization that the shooter belonged to, and how he got out, and what he does now. And then it talks about my life as far as being a 6-year-old immigrant coming to a new country and trying to assimilate, only to be told by a white supremacist one day that, you know what, this American dream that you tried to achieve was not really meant for people like you. And how, moving forward, we're trying to combat that exact rhetoric to make sure that, like, you know what, this everything is meant for immigrants and Americans, and really just trying to bring people together. And that's really what our organization does, is that we go out to different communities, schools, and try to have people understand through service learning that they are more alike than they are different.
I want to wrap this up. Is there anything that you want to add to this? Anything that you can think of?
No, just support our work. Go out and buy The Gift of Our Wounds by Pardeep Kaleka and Arno Michaelis.